This is a guided meditation. It is the origin, I believe, of Taliesin the Bard. So take a moment or two, take some deep breaths, and picture yourself being within your sacred grove, the inner grove. When you have a strong sense of being within your sacred grove, imagine an old druid teacher, a wise sage, entering your grove. He greets you and starts to light a fire, perhaps in the center of the grove. He invites you to sit by the fire while he begins to play a haunting melody on his harp. As you gaze into the flickering flames, he begins to tell you a story that will change your life forever. High up in the mountains of Wales, hidden by crag after crag and guarded by eagles, it is said that there lies the secret city of druid alchemists known as Dinas Afron, the Ambrosial City. Here the Ferelt, as these alchemists are called, practice the druid arts of magic, exploring the depths of the oceans, the heart of the earth, the civilizations of other ages and galaxies. They brew the cauldron of bright knowledge, 3 drops of which bring enlightenment to the worthy. They refine their philosophy and their arts in discussion and debate in towers of crystal that reach almost as high as the peaks of Snowdonia that surround them. The stories and songs of the bards warm their hearts by night. The herbs and oils of the healers, the ovates, bring them strength by day. They have found the Grail, and here in the innermost sanctuary of their city it radiates the power and love throughout the world. Nearby lies the body of King Arthur, surrounded by his knights, asleep in a deathless dream, but ready to reawaken if he is ever needed. Once, long ago, before the great battle of Camelon, at which King Arthur died, cut to the quick by his own son Mordred, once, long ago, when it was still early in Arthur's reign, and the Round Table had just been established at Camelot, there lived a lord and lady in a great castle by Lake Bala. The lady was none other than the goddess Saradin, queen of the harvest and of the sickle moon. Despite her beauty and her powers, there were those who denied she was a goddess. "Carowin's just a witch," they would say, their voices betraying their fear of a woman who could shape-shift into a raven or a fawn in the blinking of an eye. With her flowing red hair, deep blue eyes, and fine, broad shoulders, she inspired awe and devotion in some, fear and loathing in others. Her husband, Lord Tegid, was hardly ever at her side. For months he would be away from the castle, hunting or carousing with the other petty barons of this wild and windswept land. Of their 2 children he treasured his daughter Saraway, but he could hardly bear to look at their son Morfran, Sea Raven or Great Cow, whom they sometimes called Afgafdu, utter darkness, for so repulsive was his face. Determined that if her son could not be handsome, then at least he could be inspired and illuminated, Carowin made the journey to Dinas Afron to discover from the flower themselves the formula for the creation of Aowen. The Aowen, the magical elixir of the druids that would bring enlightenment and joy to whoever tasted but 3 of its drops. If Agafdu could not be handsome, then at least he would be wise and at peace with the world. Carradine left the children in the care of their nurse, who had been in their service of their family since childhood. She traveled for days on her mare, White Foam, until at last, reaching the mountains of Sunadoia, she saw the crystal towers of the city of Frelt on the horizon, shining in the light of the setting sun. She rode swiftly onwards, reaching the city by nightfall. Pounding on the mighty oak doors of the city's outer wall, Carradine expected them to be opened by an armed guard, but instead found herself greeted by a dark-haired woman with soft gray eyes, who, swathed in a black shawl, led her without a word to the heart of the city. There she met the inner council of the Fert, both men and women of clear demeanor and calm bearing, who listened to her tale and agreed to her request. They asked the gatekeeper to lead Carradine to the library in the central tower of the city. There, surrounded by ancient manuscripts, the librarian opened before her the first book of the Felt, and there on its pages of faded parchment was written the formula for the creation of Aowen. Once she had finished transcribing the formula, Carradine was led by the gatekeeper to the city gates. Carradine looked deep into her eyes before stepping through the gateway and mounting her horse to ride like a creature of the wind back to her castle beside Lake Bala. On her return, she rushed straight to the children's bedchamber. They both lay there sleeping. Caraway, with her golden curls framing her sweet and delicate features, and Gaddafu, with his misshapen face, tossing and turning in his sleep. Assured of the children's safety, she began at once the preparations for making the brew which would bring Aouin to her son. The Book of the Veld had told her that she must prepare a cauldron filled with fresh water, into which she must strew the herbs and roots, gathered at special times of day and night, at sunrise for some, at sunset for others, at the dark moon for some roots, and at the full moon for the rest. All were to be boiled for a year and a day within a great iron cauldron. Then out of the streaming brew would fly 3 drops of the Druid's elixir, 3 drops of bright knowledge that would bring wit and wisdom and all knowledge to whoever tasted them. Caroden left the castle and walked in the moonlight to the lake shore. The sky was filled with 1,000 stars, and the waxing moon had almost reached its zenith in the sky. Caroden stretched out her arms to the lake and began to lift them gently to the moon. She did this 9 times, and each time she lifted them up and would feel a lifting, pulling energy coming from her womb and from the lake at the same time, and she chanted softly, "Out of the womb, out of the boundless to the world of time, out of the deep I ask you to come, O vision of mine, desire of mine, yearning of mine." And as she called to the deep, to the unknown, to the mother, she pictured her son emerging from the lake, radiant with light, knowing all things, the finest poet, the most accomplished bard of Merlin's Isle. The magic done, she hurried to the blacksmith Govanon. Here in his forge, built in the heart of the mountain, Govanon drew on the powers of earth, fire, and water to craft the weapons and wheels of Lord Tegan and his allies. A druid of many years' trainings, he could call on the dragons of Belai to fly from Dinas Afron to his mountain forge, there to work at the firing of the ore with their flaming breath, as eagerly as wolves might devour a carcass. "I need a cauldron wide and deep," said Corydon, handing Govanon a bag of silver coins to pay for his work, while telling him to deliver the cauldron to an empty cottage by the lakeside. To tend the fire beneath the cauldron for a year and a day, Corydon needed servants, and as if by chance she happened upon an old blind man walking through the forest to the castle, led by a young boy. The blind man recognized Corydon at once, confusing her not for witch or mortal, but knowing in the certainty of his heart that she was the white goddess of the moon and the harvest blade. His name was Morda, Seafather, and he had lived in the forest for years, eking out a meager living as a charcoal burner. In his right hand he held a stick to steady his frail and aged body, and with his left hand he let himself be guided by Gwynwen Batch, little innocent who came from Corwinian in prowess. Caroden engaged both the young and the old man at once to chop and stockpile wood for the fire that would heat the cauldron and tend the brew as it cooked through the seasons. Several days passed until at last Govanon arrived at the cottage late at night with a newly fashioned cauldron. Caroden woke Morda and Gwynwen at once and ordered them to prepare the fire. She then hurried to the lake to draw water, pausing a moment to gaze at the moon. Returning to the cottage, she warned Gwynwen and Morda for the 9th time never to taste the brew that they would tend. "Remember," she said, "the first 3 drops bring bright knowledge that you seek for your son, but the rest of the brew brings only baleful knowledge and misery to all its touches. Make sure it is only your son who tastes the first 3 drops, and allow the rest of the mixture to boil away to nothing before the cauldron is melted down." As she filled the cauldron with lake water and added the herbs and roots, she chanted the spells given to her by the wise ones at Dinas Afron. Then she returned to her castle. For a year, Morda and Gwynwen gathered firewood and tended the cauldron, ensuring that the mixture never boiled over and that fresh water was added whenever needed. They passed the time talking of their lives, telling of their stories, and playing Whittlebill, an ancient board game older than chess. The year passed slowly, summer into autumn, and with winter came a suddenness that surprised even Morda, who had survived 70 winters in this harsh and rugged land. Waiting for the cold days to pass, Morda and Gwynwen sat closer to the fire, warming their hands in its glow, toasting food on sticks they thrust into the flames. But as day follows into night, spring came close on the heels of winter, and before long it was summer again. A year had passed, and with only 1 day before Daffy was due to receive the sacred drops, Caroden and her hapless son returned to the college, greeting Morda and Griffin briefly, before seating themselves beside the cauldron. As midnight approached, they both fell asleep. Morda sensed the fire dying down and ordered Gwynwen to toss more logs into the cauldron. As he did so, the mixture spluttered and boiled over. 3 drops flew on Gwynwen's thumb, scalding it, and without a thought he sucked them from his burning skin. In that instant the cauldron shrieked to life as in pain. There was a great cackling, spitting sound, and it burst in two, releasing the remains of the brew which ran now from the house to Lake Bala, poisoning it and the surrounding land. The grass turned black as if scorched by fire, and the horses of Grenier that grazed beside the lake would lay dead by morning. But at that instant Gwynwen knew everything. He knew that in a second Caridown would wake, and that in her fury she would seek to kill him. He ran from the cottage, and with a moment she did awake, and seeing what happened, struck Morda across the face. She ran from the cottage, screaming with rage that sent shudders down Gwynwen's spine. Within minutes Caridown had run so fast after Gwynwen that she was within inches of seizing him by the throat. She stretched out her arms as she ran, and just as her long fingernails depressed into the flesh of his neck, he discovered that he could change himself into any creature he wished, and with a thought he transformed into a hare. Darting from her grasp, he soon had the advantage, leaping over ditch and hedge. But Caridown was not to be outwitted. With the power of the goddess and the changing moon, she turned herself into a black greyhound, and the chase continued. Plunging through hedgerow and over ditches, she had soon gained ground she had lost, and there within inches of her was the hare. She rushed forward with snarling mouth to seize it by the throat, but as the dog's sharp teeth were about to sink into the terrified creatures, both the animals found themselves rushing headlong into a fast-flowing stream. Gwynwen, now possessed of all knowledge, knew that he must transform himself into a salmon, and within seconds he was downstream, feeling the cold water in his body as he swiftly swam towards the ocean. But her, within seconds, had transferred herself into an otter and considered her relentless pursuit. And as the otter's claws reached for Gwynwen, he changed into a bird, lifting his body out of the water and high into the air. But in a moment she turned herself into a hawk, and was soon soaring high above him, ready to pounce, when he, spying a pile of grain, decided that he would become a grain of wheat. Surely she would never find him there. Plummeting down from the sky, he turned himself into one tiny seed just as his body hit the grain. She flew into the ground, and with determination changed once more into a large, black-red crested hen. With uncanny precision she thrust her way through the pile, and picked and swallowed the one grain among 1,000 that was Gwynwen Batch. Contented she returned home, but the seed quickened inside her. Gwynwen had become a babe once more, and for 9 months he grew inside the womb of the goddess who tried to destroy him. When the time had come for her to give birth, Caridown was determined to kill him. But when the baby was born, the child was so fair and beautiful she could not find it within her heart to kill it. She held the fair child in her arms and suckled it a while, then placed it in a bag of leather which she sewed closed and cast into the sea. For 9 months the bag floated on the water. For 9 months Gwynwen sat in the darkness, journeying with his soul between this world and the next, finding secrets and learning songs. For 9 months he was held in the womb of the ocean, feeling the love of the moon goddess and the ebb and flow of the tide, and feeling the power of the sky god and the breath and fury of the wind. And all the while he journeyed in his leathern bag towards his future, towards his foster father Elflin, who was also traveling to meet his destiny, to meet the foster child he would soon find caught in the salmon weir of his father, Lord Grenier. Grenier had wanted to help his son Elflin, who had experienced nothing but bad luck through his life, so he told him to go down to the river and to catch as many salmon as he could. Galman used to go himself and always found a good catch of salmon there. As the fish made their way to the spawning grounds upstream, and found themselves meeting not the old stream beds of their birth, but the fatal mesh of his nets, at least, thought Grenfenir, Elfin can earn himself a princely sum with the sale of these fish and a triumphant return to the Beltane feast of celebration. But when Elfin arrived at the weir with his servants, they found not a single salmon. Confirming that his fear that he was indeed born to be unlucky, he began to eliminate his fate, until out of his corner he noticed a large leather bag. Elfin lifted the bag out of the water and raised a dagger over to slit it open. In wonder he looked at the baby before him. Turning to his servants, he exclaimed, "Behold, the radiant brow, Taliesin!" And the baby boy within the bag sat up, smiling, and gazed directly into Elfin's eyes, saying, "Taliesin it is." Elfin carried the boy home to his wife. They cared for him as if he was their own, and with each year he grew, his wisdom grew tenfold, so that when he was but 13 he was the greatest and wisest poet in the land. And when Taliesin was of age, his foster father Elfin traveled to the court of King Melegwin. There he was told the king that Taliesin was the finest bard of all, but instead of being delighted, the king was outraged, taking a claim as slight against the 24 bards of his royal court. In fury, he threw Elfin to the deepest dungeon. With his inner vision, Taliesin saw this injustice and traveled at once to the court, reassuring his foster mother before leaving that I, Taliesin, chief of the bards, with the wise druid words, will set Elphin free. He arrived at the court, rendering all of the king's bards dumbfounded with a magic spell, and told the king, "Primary chief bard am I to Elphin, and my original country is the region of the summer stars." He then caused a mighty storm to howl around the king's castle until the king repented and released Elphin from prison, accepting Taliesin as the wisest of all the bards. Even the great druid Merlin once said, "Since I, Merlin, am second only to Taliesin, let my words be heard as truth." And for this reason some say that the secret name of the island of Merlin is Taliesin's Isle, the isle of poets, dreamers, and seekers of wisdom. And that ends the story.